If you help in the children's program at King Avenue, you too can get a tattoo. Because we tend to hear the Christmas stories and the resurrection stories more than we hear the crucifixion stories, we become more familiar with those stories, and we tend to know that no one gospel has all of the Christmas story, the nativity story, and no one gospel has all of the resurrection stories. They're different, and different events happen. I never thought about it for the crucifixion, because we usually only deal with the crucifixion on Palm Sunday or Good Friday, and they kind of run the texts together. But the accounts of the crucifixion are different in each of the four Gospels. The four Gospels do have 6 points in common. One is that Jesus was crucified. 2, that 2 others were crucified with him. 3, there was a sign over his head that said, "This is Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." 4, the soldiers gambled for his clothes. 5, he was given sour wine to drink. And 6, he died before sundown. Everything else is different, depending on the gospel that you read. In John's gospel, you get the lines, "I thirst," "It is finished." In Luke's gospel, which is a sense of completion in John's gospel, it's finished. It's ended. I've fulfilled my purpose. In Luke's gospel, Jesus has the conversation with the thief on the cross, and when Jesus dies in Luke, it's, "Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit." There's this turning over of his life into God's trusted hands. In Matthew and Mark, the only words Jesus says from the cross are what we heard today. "Father, forgive them. Not, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Those are the only words Jesus says from the cross. But they're different in Mark than they are in Matthew. In Matthew, Jesus says that, and then it says, "He let out a loud cry and yielded up his spirit." Again, there's this sense of turning over his life to God. In Mark, it says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And with that, he breathed his last. The end. Nothing else. No yielding up to God. It's just, "You've forsaken me," and he dies. There's a real sense of dereliction. There's a real sense of abandonment in Mark's gospel. It's not the most uplifting gospel in the world. My God, why have you forsaken me?" Last week when I talked on what the thief said in Luke, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom," I said that's probably the most authentic prayer we have in the Bible, because we all pray that prayer. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. We want to be remembered. We want to be connected. This prayer might even be more authentic, but it's Jesus who says this prayer. And that's what's somewhat troubling by this prayer. My God, why have you forsaken me?" Forsaken, abandoned, betrayed, left behind, forgotten. We know this prayer. We know this prayer. And we might not pray it exactly this way, but my God, I just found out my partner has stage 4 cancer. Why have you forsaken me? I just found out that my child died. Why have you forsaken me? Why am I alone? Why am I abandoned? I just lost my job. Just lost my house. Why have you forsaken me? Why have you given up on me? It's this horrible, horrible feeling. One person says that this feeling of being forsaken, of abandoned, is like being roadkill. We're just there, dead, getting flattened. You know. When a friend sends us an email or a call, or we ask how that friend's doing, and they actually answer us, sometimes we want to reach out to them so they don't feel so forsaken and so alone, like roadkill. That's the point of the prayer partners, that people will not feel alone. But there are other times when somebody tells us that they have cancer, when they tell us that their partner has died, we don't know what to say. We don't know what to do. And we might want to avoid them. We might not want to return that call or answer that email or go to the funeral home. I told you several years ago about my best friend in high school's diagnosis with Parkinson's disease. And he told me that when the word got out that he had Parkinson's disease and he would soon be losing his job because of the disease, he said many people quit contacting him, quit calling him. He was forsaken. He was forsaken. And sometimes we don't know what to do other than to separate from that person. So, why Jesus, though? Why Jesus? Why is Jesus forsaken? If we care about Jesus, if we sing, "What a friend I have in Jesus," we ought to wonder, why is he forsaken? This is the person who said, "God loves you so much that even the hairs of your head are numbered." This is the person who said, "If you ask for anything in my name, the Father will give it to you." This is the person who said, "The Father and I are one. If you see me, you've seen the Father." This is a person who's really tight with God. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus prayed, "Abba, Father, Daddy, Father." It's intimate. "Daddy, Father, if it be thy will, take this cup from me." But there's no Abba, Father here on the cross in Mark. It's just, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" The intimacy is gone. It's not a whippy-skippy passage. What is going on here? Why is Jesus forsaken? Well, Paul says in 2 Corinthians, "He was made to be sin who knew no sin." So it's the sin that's on him that makes him feel forsaken and separated from God. Now, I've spent almost my entire ministry trying to figure this out, what that line means, "made him to be sin who knew no sin," so I can understand what's happening to Jesus, why he feels forsaken. I think about the issue of scapegoating. The Old Testament, would put on the Day of Atonement, would put the sins on a scapegoat and send it out into the wilderness, representing the sins of the people that were on the scapegoat. Scapegoating is blaming somebody else for what I do, blaming somebody else for responsibility of what's wrong in my life, blaming somebody else for what's wrong in the world. We know about scapegoating. Blacks are frequently scapegoated. Immigrants and refugees are frequently scapegoated. Gays are frequently scapegoated. Why did that hurricane level that city? Well, it's because that town accepted gays. Women are frequently scapegoated. It goes back to maybe the oldest story in the Old Testament. When Adam is called on the carpet for eating the apple or the fruit, Adam's response is, "The woman you gave me, she made me do it." That's one place where I knew the Bible dealt in truth with a capital T. Adam double scapegoats there. He blames God, and he blames the woman. I blame Susan all the time. Susan handles she's the brains in our family. And she handles all the household repairs and so on. And often she'll send me to the hardware store to get something. And I have no idea what she's talking about. And I will say always to the macho salesperson, my wife wants me to get this. Yeah, I scapegoat Susan. And what we do when we scapegoat is we dump that blame. We dump that anger. We dump that hostility. We dump what's wrong in our life on that other person. And sin is a separation. And sin separates us from other people. And that anger and that greed and that hostility and that lack of forgiveness separate us from other people. And we dump that on someone. It's their fault, not mine. And we're separated from that person even more. And they become uglier to us. In Psalm 22, the psalmist says, "I've become a worm. I've become an object of repulsion. People can't stand to look at me." And that's what we do to a scapegoat. And that act of separation is dumped on Jesus. And it even reaches the point where if it isn't good enough to blame Susan, it isn't good enough to blame Chris, if it isn't good enough to blame my neighbor, I'll blame God. Why did this happen? Why did God make it happen? How many times have we said that? Why did God let this happen? We'll scapegoat God. And all of this is dumped on Jesus. The crowd that was around him reviled him and mocked him and made fun of him, and they were sarcastic. That whole scene about giving him the sour wine, it's just sarcasm. And he takes all that on, and it's all put on him. And all the problems of the world are blamed on him. And he feels forsaken. Why? Why have you forsaken me? And he dies. That's it. That's it in Mark's gospel. Years ago in Lit Club, we read a book called Little Bee, which is a really good book. It's about two young women who are caught up in the Civil War and the oil company stuff in Nigeria. And they're brought up in a Christian village, and they flee because of the Civil War. And the one young woman is horribly abused and horribly killed. And little Bee survives. But what's interesting is, in their village, they only had one Bible. And the Bible that they had ended with this passage from Mark. My God, why have you forsaken me? And he gave up a loud cry and breathed his last. That was the last verse in their Bible. The rest had been lost. Imagine growing up with that Bible. This isn't the end of the story in Mark. Mark doesn't say much more, but he says several things that I think are important. The first is The centurion at the cross says, truly, this man was the Son of God. It's a wake-up call. It's like, oh my God. We dumped all this stuff on God. We blamed God for what's wrong in our lives. We blamed God for what's wrong in the world. We blamed God for the Romans. We blamed God for all this. Oh my God. We killed God. We killed God. Wake up. Quit blaming and take responsibility. And it says there were a group of women from a distance watching this. He wasn't alone. There was the group of women who had been with him throughout his ministry. And when we think we're forsaken, there's always a group, there's always a person that's there. Then the last thing that Mark says is that the curtain in the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The purpose of that curtain was to separate God from humanity. And the curtain is torn, and the separation is obliterated. And there is no more separation between God and humanity. It says in the Bible, in one of the epistles of Peter, that Jesus spent that time between the crucifixion and the resurrection in hell, preaching the gospel to those in hell. I think Jesus goes to hell more than just that 2-day period. I think Jesus goes to hell every day. I think Jesus is always in hell because the curtain was torn. And when we are in hell, Jesus is there with us. And we might go to hell lots of times during a week, during a month, during a year. We might feel forsaken. But the curtain was torn in two. And when we think we're in hell, we know Jesus is there too, because he prayed that prayer about feeling and being so separated from God. There's a debate about whether this, my God, why hast thou forsaken me, is a prayer of faith or a prayer of unfaith. On the surface, it sounds like unfaith. Don't believe you're present, God. I experience you as an absence. But it's still my God. It's still my God. And maybe that's all we can get out sometimes. Not Daddy Father, not Abba Father, not, oh, wonderful, glorious God. Maybe all we can get out is my God. My God. But that's enough. That's enough. It doesn't put all of our life in light and sunshine and roses, but it gives us one step and then another. Jesus felt abandoned by God, and what he did was abandon himself to God. And when we feel abandoned by God and say, my God, we're abandoning ourselves to God. That's the hope. That's the hope. And sometimes that's the only hope we have. May it be so. Amen.